Toward the end of Luke chapter 12, Jesus talks about three things, and they're really all connected. First, he talks about division. He says, don't think that I came to bring peace, but rather division. The division he's talking about, of course, is a call of separation to follow Christ. Holiness is two things. It's separation from the world and separation to God. And that's what the call to believe in Christ is. That's what the call to follow Christ is. And in fact, this division is so serious that will sometimes even affect the most intimate relationships, family relationships, for example. Secondly, Jesus talks about being able to discern the time, and specifically he uses the example of weather. In Israel, there are the rains that come off of the Mediterranean. The rain clouds come from the west to the east, and the people could discern that there was going to be rain because these clouds were coming in from the Mediterranean. Similarly, from the south, there were these hot winds that came off of the southern deserts, and the people could discern what the weather was going to be like. And Jesus says, how is it that you can discern the weather, but you can't discern the time? Specifically, he's talking about spiritually. He's talking about discerning the spiritual times. And then finally, Jesus talks about making peace with your adversary. And all of these three examples are all connected, because how is it he talks about division and that yet he also talks about making peace? Jesus said, I didn't come to bring peace, but rather division. And yet, at the same time, he tells us, discern the time and make peace with your adversary. What does it all mean? Well, we need to make peace with God, and primarily that's what Jesus is talking about. He's saying every human being is in an adversarial relationship with God because of sin. Sin produces brokenness. It produces brokenness in our relationship with God. It produces brokenness in our relationship with our fellow man. And Jesus is saying, on the one hand, you are going to have to make a decision. You're going to have to consecrate yourself and make a decision to follow Christ. Put the first commandment first. If you love even your own life more than you love God, Jesus said you're not worthy of Him. If we love father, mother, sister, brother, family relationships, if that comes first before your heavenly relationship, Jesus said you're not worthy of Him. There comes a division that is necessary to the Christian life in that we must commit our way to the way of following hard after Jesus. However, when a person is a Christian, there comes first a reconciliation in our relationship with God, and that's not automatic. Jesus is saying you're going to have to be proactive in that. If there is any breach, if there are any unreconciled issues between you and God, Jesus says don't put it off to the day of judgment, because we are all allotted a certain amount of time, and it's appointed to man once to die, and after this the judgment. That means you have one life to live. You have one chance to get it right. This life is not forever. There is a life that is forever, and what you do in this life is going to determine the life to come. In Luke 12, in verses 57 through 59, Jesus says, make every effort to be reconciled when you're in an adversarial relationship. He said, when you go with your adversary to the magistrate, make every effort. That's something that we have to do. Make every effort to be reconciled. Make every effort along the way to settle with him, lest he drag you to the judge deliver you to the officer, and the officer throw you in prison. In other words, this is something that's time sensitive. The person who doesn't pay his parking tickets and just says, well, that's fine, I'll deal with it later. He comes out and discovers his car is being towed. It was time sensitive. We can think of many examples. Food, for example. This fruit is fresh right now, and it would be delicious to eat. But if I let it sit over a week or two or three, it's going to spoil. Why? Because it's time sensitive. So I can discern something in the natural that is time sensitive. Jesus is saying, don't delay and don't think that you have all the time in the world to be reconciled where there's a breach either in your relationship with God or in your relationship to others. Because Jesus said the second commandment is like the first. When we love God, we should also love our neighbor as ourselves. And if there's any breach in a relationship, that produces some kind of tension that is time sensitive. And Jesus says make every effort to be reconciled, because there is a day of judgment, and if you just let those accounts go unsettled, you may be surprised on the day of judgment.